My topic is the topic of authenticity, and particularly in leadership. And I want to tell you a little bit about how I came to this topic, because what I research and teach about are what I call what got you here won't get you there transitions, the kind of inflection points in our career where what it took to be successful and probably happy in one situation is very different than what it is in the other. And you could think about that as we step up into bigger leadership roles, for example, when we are no longer influencing and motivating and persuading people on the basis of our specialty expertise, what we know, our technical or functional know-how, to having to influence and motivate and persuade on the basis of a bigger basket of things that includes soft skills at motivating and inspiring people, strategic acumen, the big picture. And what's interesting about those moments, which are hard for people by and large, which create a lot of failures in leadership transitions in organizations, is not really developing the skill set. What's hard is that people, in order to develop the skill set, have to underinvest in the things they do really well and around which they've built their sense of identity, and have to overinvest in things that they don't do so well at all and that challenge their sense of self. And so what was happening in both my research and my teaching is I was seeing a lot of people faced with a conflict. I can be myself, but I won't be so effective, or I can do what it takes to be effective at a loss to my sense of self. And this was happening as one of the kind of key topics in my field of leadership was authentic leadership. It kind of became the thing. And in fact, in an article in the Harvard Business Review, we sort of plotted the rise of the term authenticity in the business press, like The Economist, the FT, the Wall Street Journal. You can see a very nice curve going like this in terms of frequency of mention that plots perfectly to decline of trust in business leaders like we heard about this morning. And so you can see kind of right away part of what's going on. And there's been just this enormous cottage industry that has evolved around authentic leadership. You can spend a lot of money taking courses and buying books and attending workshops just on how to be yourself, which clearly signals there's an issue here. There is a problem. But what was happening was it was coming up a lot in the people that I teach and work with, as in, I need to change, but the problem is it's just not me. And I'll give you an example to make it vivid, and then maybe we can talk about how it applies here. But one of the examples that really stuck with me is I was working with a CEO of a fairly substantial transportation company. She'd been brought in from the outside and had, pretty much turned this thing around, had very clear numbers to show for her success after about 2 years in. But she and the founder of the company, who was now the chairman, were always at each other's throats. They were very different stylistically. He was a kind of a colorful, charismatic entrepreneur, very much gut and instinct and emotion, and she was a French engineer, data-driven. And this is playing itself out in a very dysfunctional way at the board meetings, where they were really trying to kind of take the firm to the next level. And so as I listened to her tell me about this conflict that was really making her life miserable, I said to her, look, Anna, her pseudonym, I said, it sounds to me that what he's telling you is maybe you can lead a little bit less with the numbers, and perhaps get a bit more into the why behind your thinking. Maybe tell a story about why it is that you believe this firmly, or about a story about a lesson you've learned that really clarifies where you want to take the company. And she looked at me like I was from Mars. And I'll never forget the words. She said, we're in danger today of being mesmerized by people who play with our reptilian brains. For me, this is manipulation. Of course I can tell a story, but if the string is too obvious, I cannot make myself do it. And so the question I ask, is Anna being authentic? Give me something. Yes! Is she being rigid? Yes! Now the question is, how do you tell the difference between one and the other as you're moving into waters that are very unfamiliar for you? And that's the question that I found really intriguing as I try to help people get to the next stage, whether they're business managers trying to lead, whether they're entrepreneurs trying to get to a new level of scale and complexity. How do you know the difference between the two so that you can adapt and grow and learn, but at the same time stick to what's core, because that's ultimately what we want. We do want to be authentic, but we don't want to get stuck in a caricature of our past. And so I started to dig into how do we define this, and I found some interesting things that are just good food for thought. The most basic definition, at least in business, in art, it's simply not a copy, although, we're not copies. But the most basic definition is being true to yourself, right? Being authentic means true to yourself. But what self is that? So my area of study is the area of identity, not as identity theft, but the self concept. What self? Historical, today's self, your future aspiration, a possibility. Being authentic doesn't condemn you to being as you always have been, right? Nobody pigeonholes ourselves more than we do to ourselves. And so there was a bit of a problem with that. Now, some people have tried to solve it by saying be authentic to an aspiration. What was interesting in the people that I work with who are really trying to make that transition into broader, more senior leadership impact is that they couldn't say clearly, this is who I want to be. This is the aspirational self. In fact, they were full of ambivalence. They wanted to have bigger impact. They wanted to move up, but they didn't want to become like those people they didn't trust, who they saw as political and disingenuous. And so it was always a bit fraught in terms of, is this really what I want? And in trying to lead and influence and motivate, am I actually going to veer off in a direction that I won't like? So that's a bit of a problem. A second way we define authenticity has to do with transparency. So narrowing the gap between what you think and really feel and what you actually say, right? Not lying to people, not being BSy about what you have to say. Now, yes, but at the same time, I attended the session yesterday where we had this wonderful discussion about the possibilities of telepathy. Do we really want a situation in which we're fully transparent in what we think and feel about our coworkers or about our bosses, about our clients? There's some moderation to be done there. And the third definition, which seems like the answer, but is actually complicated as well, has to do with being true to our values. So something a little bit more abstract. And that can be the solution, but if you actually look at how Anna thought about her situation, certainly she felt true to her values and true to what she had learned. And so one of the things I advise is trying to make a distinction between what we call the big V values, the universal values of respect, integrity, and maybe the little v values that have to do with our professional socialization, what we've been trained to do. I was trained as a statistician. As a statistician, you don't claim certainty, you claim probabilities, likelihood, conditions. When I started my career teaching at the Harvard Business School MBAs, I had to quickly learn to give them 3 takeaway bullet points that had nothing to do with my scientific training, right? And so values are important, but we also have to stretch and grow in how we speak to different stakeholders as we move into different kinds of situations. And so really looking at this panoply of definitions and situations in which people felt stuck with this, it was really important to give an out and to kind of help them think in ways that were a little bit less simplistic about what does it mean to be true to self at the same time as you are growing and evolving and changing. And I have to say that probably the most compelling way of thinking about it comes out of humanistic psychology that basically says to be authentic is to be self-determining, to be in control of your destiny, to act with agency so that you can grow and evolve and change. And what that requires is a lot of what we talked about today in terms of growth mindset. It requires an ability to experiment, to learn, to try. I call it being playful with your sense of self, because ultimately what that means is when you don't know what you, in this very different context, being effective and persuasive means, all you can do is try something. It might bomb, it might tell you, this is not me, this is not who I want to be. It might work, but this is not the person I want to become. But the only way you learn those things is by trying them. And so that's why I talk about being playful with your sense of self, which means you try. You're not committing to be that person. What you're committing to do is not repeating the same thing you've always done that you know doesn't work ad infinitum. It's a kind of a design thinking with the self in order to learn and grow and stretch. And honestly, I think that has very big implications if you think about one of the big things we've been talking about here from the beginning, which is how do we help particularly large companies with the digital disruption and transformation that's coming down the pike, because ultimately it's, to some extent about technical skills, but it is a lot about emotional skills, a lot about helping people deal with the fear of displacement, of obsolescence, of change. If we take seriously the thought that things like AI and machine learning mean you change the whole thing. You reinvent the organization, you reinvent the business process, you reinvent management, you reinvent HR. That's threatening, that's scary. Are we going to create a situation like my managers in which rather than wanting to grow and learn and experiment as is needed, people actually hold on to their scared, most conservative self for the sake of authenticity? Probably not. So it's a relevant thing. It's important, obviously, to be yourself. I would just say it's really important as well to think about it adaptively in an evolving way, and rather than seize on it as an excuse for staying within our comfort zones. So I think I'm going to stop here and maybe take some questions. I can certainly add color and flavor, but I'd be curious to know what this all means to you.
Hi, I'm Nico. My question would be, can people truly change? Because if they can't, if I was talking to a startup team, for example, I would not tell, let's say, the analytical founder to suddenly become a charismatic founder. I would say, join up with the charismatic founder, and together you guys, or women, etc., can lead this, right? So can people truly change?
Yeah, it's a great question, and all of the nuances that, in the way that you've framed it, are kind of at the heart of a lot of debates in our field. Can people truly change? The answer, of course, is yes. I mean, look at say, a Bill Gates and how he changed throughout his time in Microsoft and afterwards. So, of course, people can change. And neurologically, we know now that the brain is infinitely more plastic. We also know from research on mindset is that people have mindsets about their capacity to change, whether it has to do with leadership, whether it has to do with things like charisma or intelligence. If you have a fixed mindset, you believe that the talent you have is more or less what you have, and so therefore you choose situations in which that are a good fit, in which you can demonstrate it, show it, put it into play. If you have a growth mindset, you believe that that talent is malleable and expandable with practice and effort a lot. It depends on how different from the current state, and therefore you choose situations that allow you to practice and experiment and learn and grow. And those are very different choices in how you allocate your time. If you choose the latter, you're going to change more than if you choose if you believe the former. And so that's a long-winded way of answering you, but it all depends. In my field, we see that what really changes people is experience. Actually, varied experience and meaningful feedback are the ways we change. And so if we choose the fit model, we won't. But if we get put in very different situations and we have people who help us and who coach us and who teach us, then we do.
Hi. There's a German bestseller called Wer bin ich und wenn ja, wie viele? Who am I and if yes, how many am I?
Who am I and if yes?
Who am I and if yes, how many?
How many?
A weird title, but it was a bestseller. And but how would you? What would you say? How could I be authentic?
How could I be authentic in that sense? In the sense of being many.
How do you consult people to be authentic?
Right. So let me just speak to the title first, which sounds wonderful. I wish I could read German. I don't. In my field of a mix of psychology and sociology, we agree with that. We are many, depending on situation. We have many, many manifestations of who we are, and we have also many possible selves or ideas about who we might become in the future. Now, those might be fragmented, or those might cohere in some ways. And that's kind of for us to figure out how it comes together, what are the red threads, maybe what are the life stories that pull it together and lend coherence to all of that. In that context, I think you're asking, how do I be myself? Right? So how do you be? Why? I think for me, the really interesting thing is, why is it such a question? Why is it such a question on how do I be myself? And can you be yourself while at the same time acknowledging that we're often on stage? And we've got to manage in some way, what is it about ourselves that we want to show through, and what is it that perhaps might not be the most appropriate thing of showing through. But I think the best way to be yourself is to push your limits of yourself and to question, and most of all, to strive as much as you can to keep yourself from deceiving yourself, because we all suffer from very positive illusions about who we are, about how good we are. You know, the whole thing about how everybody's average, or at least, no, everybody's above average. So, how many of you think you're above average driver? Yeah, we're not going to get a normal curve in the room. And that comes with all kinds of abilities. And so part of being authentic is maybe working on that, working on self-awareness so that you come to understand in a more accurate way who you are as you impact others, and then you're in a better place to correct it. Yes?
Hi, thank you. First off, I really enjoyed your book, Working Identity, so fanboy moment. I wanted to ask a question about authenticity in the age of social media.
Yeah.
You said we're on stage. I mean, now all the world's a stage. I have a president who is tweeting authentic messages from his id all the time. So on the one hand, we have accessibility for leaders, sort of a totally new paradigm that the person on the pedestal is now sharing with all of us very personal messages. On the other hand, we have the other phenomenon of everyday people presenting a self to Instagram or to Facebook that might not be authentic or real as well. Do you see, when you're teaching your business school students, this element of something that you try to address in the notion of authenticity as projected or as lived?
Yeah. All right, so let me try. There's lots of parts to that. Thank you for the compliment. With regard to the Instagram self, or that curated best self, that is an aspect of identity. It's an aspired self. It's a desired self. It's perhaps a future possibility that is cultivated. Those are key aspects of identity. Again, we're not condemned to being our worst self, our ugliest self, our least, loved and friendless self. We are also able to project a future that we want to work towards. And what these possible selves do is they motivate us and they channel our attention so that we can become those things. They're not necessarily bad things. Now, we can get into a very different conversation about some of their uglier consequences, but I think those are just simply manifestations of the self, which is a very complicated psychological construct. Now, back to the topic of our president and his authenticity, which, by the way, was one of the things that was appealing, at least in the so-called base. I think part of why he gained a lot of currency is he was perceived as saying things nobody else dared to say, things people thought but were no longer sayable in polite company. And I don't know what is it that turned in that direction, but the interesting thing is if you actually look at the evolution of his tweets, he's increasingly less restrained, shall we say. And there is a stream of research on authenticity that shows that the more power we have, the more we express ourselves authentically in the sense of saying what we actually think and mean, almost in a dysfunctional way. It can veer off in the direction of no inhibition, no self-restraint. And I think that's part of what we're seeing with this particular individual. Yes, please.
Hi, me too. Kudos for working identity. It actually helped me. I think it must have been 20 years ago or something to make a good career shift. So it was a great book, and I still recommend it. My question is actually twofold. One is, it seems like the focus in the US has shifted from the search for the authentic self to the sense of purpose. Everyone I know in the major US corporations right now is in some way trying to identify the purpose. So no one sells shoes anymore. What you do instead is you provide someone with a floating opportunity to connect with Mother Earth or something like that. I mean, it's complex, but everybody is in a more or less sophisticated way trying to do that. Question to you is, what do you think of it? Is that a good replacement for the search for self? And my second question is, for a corporation, how do you help them draw the boundaries between, to your point of flexibility, an employee trying to be flexible about the concept of self and experimenting with new ways, and just efficiency? So if I'm a French data engineer and I'm trying to learn to be a gut-driven, charismatic leader, there will be a lot of mistakes in the process and there will be some awkwardness around me. Is that okay? And how do you manage that?
Okay. So first question was about a shift from authenticity to purpose. And both of them, by the way, share in common a thing that has been a social evolution, certainly for the 30 years I've been watching this, which is the importance of meaning in our work, in our careers. So work and career is not simply a way of making a living, but a way of really expressing who we are and adding meaning to our lives. And I think it's a very positive evolution because it shifts the focus from internal, me and my navel, to external. How can I have a positive impact in the world around me? And I think that's why we are seeing that evolution. To your second question is all of this experimenting to try to push me into a different skill set or to kind of learn, is it somehow dysfunctional because you lose efficiency? You know, we always have a trade-off between exploiting and exploring as people, as organizations. You know, the problem a lot of incumbent organizations have had is that they went too far in the direction of exploiting what they already did well to the detriment of exploring new business models and new evolutions. And I think the same thing happens to individuals, and organizations are starting to recognize it. One of the conversations that I've been having with people in this whole kind of journey towards digital and AI and everything else is how the specific skills are actually changing quite rapidly. And in fact, what you need is people who are agile, who know how to learn things that they don't already come equipped with, and how important a lot of these soft skills are around it. And so, yes, you will always have an efficiency loss whenever you're trying to learn anything new. The problem is, do you take the short-term hit? You know, do you want to pay now or do you want to pay later? And I think it is important to realize that there's a cost now to learning that will be higher later if it does not happen. I think we're out of time. Thank you very much.